Hi, I'm Jess, co-host of the Elder Tree podcast and herbalist at Evans Head Naturopathy. You're listening to the Self-Care with Herbs segment, where each month I invite a new guest to chat about how weaving plants into their days enriches their experience of self-care, exploring routines, rituals and recipes for elevating mind, body and spirit. In this episode, I had the pleasure of welcoming women's health naturopath Emma Jacques to the podcast. Emma's always had a love of eating and growing good food and spending time outside in nature and in her garden. Undertaking a 4-year Bachelor of Naturopathy degree while also birthing and caring for 2 children and coming face to face with mum burnout inspired her to focus on women's health and in particular Mothercare in her practice. Emma's been practicing as a naturopath since 2015 and spent 4 years working alongside acclaimed integrative GP Dr Oscar Serrallach, helping mothers rediscover their vitality and manage their health on the other side of birth. As part of her work with Dr Serrallach, Emma contributed a section on diet to his book, The Postnatal Depletion Cure. During this episode, we chat about Emma's childhood, her love of helping mum and dad in the garden, spending hours outside collecting treasures from nature for potions. Like many plant folk, Emma's good witch tendencies appeared early. She loved getting magical with her nature potions and pretending to cast spells on her soft toys to heal their imaginary ailments. It was after reading an article by a naturopath about how herbs and healthy food can support our health that Emma's interest was really sparked, and she enrolled in a naturopathy degree at Southern Cross University. During our chat, Emma shares how she encourages her clients to prioritise self-care above eating well and exercising, because when our cups are full, these other things come more easily. We chat about the importance of bringing in loved ones so they see the necessity of us taking time for ourselves and can be there to help if needed. And above all, that self-care isn't a privilege, it's an essential part of living well, that we know how to nurture and support ourselves. Emma makes some really good points about being realistic about forming new habits. We talk about how falling off the wagon with a new self-care habit doesn't have to be the end of the road, and how being aware of this makes the habit easier to maintain. We talk about how mothers often experience that sense of feeling overwhelmed. Sounds, touch, it all just seems too much, and how herbs can give that extra arm's length of space. Emma shares the joy of injecting a little bit of beauty into our lives and the benefits of being very conscious of our breathing and how both of these can be a game changer for the nervous system. As both a busy mum and an experienced women's health practitioner, Emma has a lot of practical and simple wisdom to share. There's lots of tips and tricks you'll take away from this chat. Good morning and welcome, Emma. It's so lovely to have you here today.
Hi, Jess. Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting to chat to you.
It is, and we know each other quite well, but it's going to be really lovely to really pull out your story and hear from you what's thriving at the moment, where self-care is making its way into your day. But I'd actually really love to start with a question about your background, and I'd love to know how your relationship with plant medicine began.
When I knew you were going to ask me this, because you did let me know that, it was interesting to reflect back and think about where did it start, because it wasn't something that I was introduced to, that my parents used or that anybody had introduced to me. But when I was a kid, I just remember I grew up in suburban Sydney, but we had a huge backyard and I was always outside. We had lots of trees that you could climb, and we used to grow things out of fun. My dad had a veggie patch, and we had flowers in the garden, and on the weekends my parents were often outside. We had a pool, and we were just always outdoors having lunch, and they would garden and things like that. And I remember spending so much of my childhood outdoors. The only time I'd go inside was when it was dark, basically. And I remember always picking things and making potions, and being a child who grew up in the 90s, I remember I had this awful 90210 bum bag that I used to wear, and I used to pick, we had a big wisteria vine that grew over a pergola, and I used to pick wisteria leaves, and we had a big mulberry tree, and I used to pick mulberries, and I'd go around the garden and pick these flowers and pick petals and pick things and put them all in my 90210 bum bag. And then I'd go and find a spot, and I would, get sand out of the sand pit or get water out of the tap and make these potions. And I remember I used to find books that I had and pretend they were spell books and pretend that it, gave me instructions for how to do my potions. And I've often plastered them onto the cat or, something along those lines. So it's funny. I think it was just one of those things that I used to play with. But I think it's always sort of been there in a way. And I used to love gardening with my dad or my mum, and they'd often encourage us to buy seed packets and chuck some seeds in the ground, and we grow herbs that they'd use in cooking. So I think it was just a natural interest sort of around being outdoors, and I think alongside herbal medicine, I always had an interest in growing veggies. And I do remember finishing school, not knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I always had an interest in things like sort of art and history and interesting things that I couldn't really find, were going to get me a job. And I tried to do some stuff around sort of web design in my final year at school. And then I realised that I was going to struggle sort of sitting in front of a computer all day. And I spent the first 3 months after school sort of in the backyard, just making a huge veggie patch and growing things until my mum said, Emma, this is enough. Like, you have to get a job. If you want to stay here, you're going to have to start paying rent, and you have to get a job or go to uni or do something. And I was always a high achiever. I always got really good marks at school, but I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I think it was that sitting in my veggie patch and watering all of my plants and thinking, what do I enjoy? I need to do something that I enjoy. And so I thought I'll go and get a job in a plant nursery. And so my first, several years of working were working in plant nurseries. And I really loved that. I loved being outside. I love growing things. And so, I think that's just always been a natural interest of mine. And then I think I remember reading an article in a magazine, and it was written by a naturopath. And this article was talking about, herbs and using herbs daily and eating food because that benefited your health and, movement and all this sort of holistic health stuff. And I read it and I thought, I didn't realise this was a job. Like this just makes complete natural sense to me, that you eat good food and, herbs were interesting and, it was all a bit magical. And so I thought I'd love to do that one day. And then I did end up working in an office job for a while after that and got absolutely bored out of my brain. And once again, it was that push to deep think about what do I want to do. And that was when I decided to sign up and do the naturopathy degree, which I did with you, Jess, at Southern Cross Uni. And it was a great degree because we did have nutrition as a part of that. We did have phytotherapy and, herbal medicine as a part of that. And I think I always found this sort of beautiful magic with herbal medicine. It's playing with these things that are beneficial for your health, and they work so wonderfully. And it still surprises me today how well herbs work. That has never gotten old for me.
Yes.
That how well these things work, but it was kind of lovely to learn the science behind it and go, well, we've known these things for thousands of years. These feel like things that we should know or that we should be passing down to each other, and we kind of lost it. But now we have some of this science that shows us, they do work, and this is how they do work. And so, just to go back to your question, I think it was just an accumulation of natural interests and things that spoke to me and lit me up, and following that path more than anything else.
Yeah. So I recognise that story of making potions in the garden. It's one that's a really common thread amongst herbalists and naturopaths, and lots of people that I've spoken to have been people who've enjoyed spending time outside and always loved, picking things and smelling things and connecting with the plants in that way. So it's really lovely to hear that was your start too.
Yeah, and I think it's just that natural. I remember being a kid and just liking to lie under the lemon tree, and we had mint growing under this lemon tree, and just looking in the grass and just seeing like the insects walk around. And I think it was that real slow down, beautiful feeling that you get when you're in nature. And I do recognise that in the other herbalists that I speak to, is that that's almost something that we just naturally are all drawn toward. Yeah.
And I remember too, when I first met you, you were working in horticulture with plants, and I was always envious that you already had that really strong connection, and that you recognising the plants and being able to classify them was a skill set of yours already.
That's nice to hear. Yeah, it's something I find easy, and I think it is one of those things that it's, if you've got a natural interest in something. I can do maths, I can do some of the other stuff. I don't really have a huge interest in it, but I think plants are always something that I found interesting and pleasurable.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful connection to have. I think it brings you closer to the medicine when you have that connection.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. So, Em, I know that you run a clinic focusing on women's health, and that you're also a mother. And so I imagine that prioritising self-care needs to be something that you do regularly. And I was wondering what self-care means to you.
I think self-care is one of those things that it's so important. It's hard to implement, or I think it's one of those things that we talk about a lot. We know that it's important. I do try to implement it, but I don't always do that successfully. I do think that because I do work in women's health, and I do particularly work with a lot of very busy women and busy mothers, I think that there's a complete disconnect with the pace of the world in which we're forced to sort of comply into society, in a way that's unavoidable, and that makes self-care sort of even more important. It's the world we live in is that we juggle so much. For a lot of us, we are required and enjoy working. But, being a parent is very time consuming and energy consuming. And then you've got to clean the house, and then you've got to look after your pets, and then you've got to, do all of the admin stuff and pay the bills. And I think that was the biggest thing I found when I became a mother. And I became a mother while I was studying, and then I had my second child right at the end, and then I opened a clinic straight away. So I was bonkers, and just sort of took it all on. And I think the biggest thing I learned being a mum was that I didn't realise the spare time that I had previously to naturally implement self-care without really even thinking about it. I'd wake up and I'd go to the beach, and I'd have a swim, and I'd have a walk, and I'd play in my veggie garden, and I'd play with my herbs, and I'd, just do these things out of fun and interest more so. And I had the time to do that, where all of a sudden becoming a mother, I was so time poor, and I was sleep deprived, and I was energy poor, and, doing all of the things it was huge. I think I hit the point at about 8 months after having my first, where I recognised that I was sort of completely tied up in that mum burnout feeling, which, a lot of my clients are. And I think, it's an area I enjoy working with people because I know how that feels. I had terrible sleepers, my children, and so it became very apparent very quickly that self-care certainly needed to be something that I prioritised, but I had to figure out how to prioritise it in a way that was, time efficient too, which,
yes,
in a sense, not that it takes some of the pleasure out of it, but once again, it's a pressure to go, well, look, all the things I've got to do, I've got to set aside a time, and I have to actually make it a certain time, and I have to logically think about how I'm going to do that, I guess, rather than sort of letting it flow.
Yeah.
So, I think self-care is probably more important in this day and age, than maybe it ever has been before. And I do think we have to think, strategically about how we do implement that. But, I say it all to a lot of my clients that, we think of healthy food and exercise as being the two main pillars of health. But I want to put self-care, relaxation, whatever that might mean to you, as number one above those two things. Because if you're like me or like a lot of other women I speak to, and you are juggling a lot of balls, if you're overwhelmed, if you're stressed, if the to-do list is too long, if you're finding that relaxation is hard, or, you're anxious or you're tired, then the food and the exercise stuff is going to be really, really difficult if you're not doing something to support your nervous system or care for yourself or be able to garner that sort of space.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's difficult to feel safe enough to think clearly, to prioritise food and exercise when you're in that heightened state of fatigue and stress that comes when you haven't been able to implement self-care regularly.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it's, it almost, self-care sometimes almost sounds like it's a bit of a luxury thing, but I don't think it is. I think it's something that we need to allow ourselves to do. And other people need to allow us to do that as well. I think we're often as mothers considered these super mums, and I don't like the term super mum. I think there's a lot of pressure, and I think often we do appear on the surface like we're doing all of these things, and potentially, maybe that we're doing them quite well, when I think a lot of us are finding it a little bit difficult. To breathe sometimes, and I think that you support the people around you need to be aware of that too, and need to sort of allow us to have some of that time or that space, or recognise that need. That it's an important thing for everybody to make sure that they've got that balance there, and it's and I think self-care is very different for everybody. I think it's about finding the things that light you up or that make you feel relaxed, or it's very different for everybody, but I think it's important to have a look at it and try and implement it, and even if it's just grabbing those little windows of time.
Absolutely, yeah. And I imagine that a lot of women come to you, and often this may happen with yourself as well, where you have periods of time where self-care just falls by the way, because as you said, you're not able to be spontaneous with it anymore, because you have to really think about it and schedule it into your day. And I'm wondering, for yourself and even for your clients as well, what sorts of whispers you might start to hear from your body or your mind when you're not able to invest that time in yourself.
I think when you're in these sort of health professions, we look at things very holistically, and I think that the thing that I recognise and will often, say to people is that I think we've all got different whispers. For some of my clients, it's that their tummies go offline first, and they get a lot of digestive upsets, and we know there's a big link between the brain and whether you're in fight or flight or whether you're in rest and digest. And, you know, for me personally, I get that complete sort of nervous system adrenal, you know, I get overwhelmed when I need more self-care. I feel like that to-do list is too long, and I always describe it a little bit like I'm on a treadmill, and that treadmill is sort of going faster and faster, and I kind of feel like I'm going to fall off the end of the treadmill. I don't know what's going to happen if I fall off. I just have to sort of keep running faster, and it's like I need something that can slow this down. I find for a lot of people and for myself, my sleep can start to go out a little bit. And I think being a mum, and I think this is the other thing that I often hear from other mums that they feel terribly about, is that I can get a bit snappy with my kids. You know, it's like my tolerance is lower, and it's not just sort of that overwhelm in my head from the things that I have to do, or that seems bigger than maybe it would if I was looking after myself a bit better or had a bit more space. But it's almost like, you know, a lot of that external stimuli, like noise gets too much, people asking you too many questions all at once gets too much, you know, that feeling like it's like, I just need to be by myself or in a quiet space, or, you know, and then everything will calm down. And I think sometimes we don't, you know, particularly when you're a mum, it's hard sometimes to avoid that. My children are beautiful. They just want to ask me questions. I want to be there to answer it for them instead of being a bit snappy, saying I don't have the time right now. Or and I find that, you know, self-care and, you know, herbal medicine particularly being a part of that will often feel like it just gives me that extra arm's length of space. So that I can, you know, be in those moments rather than feeling like I have to try and avoid them, or, you know, try and retreat to my own sort of quiet space in order to settle my nervous system or get things back into balance.
Yeah. You spoke about guilt there, Em, and I think that leads us nicely into the next question, because I often find for myself and also for the women that I see that guilt is a big barrier to self-care.
Absolutely. And it's, you know, I've never spoken to anyone who's never experienced mum guilt. and you know, I think we naturally often feel like we need to prioritize our children. I think that's important. You know, this is survival. We should feel that way. We are, you know, not only is it out of complete and utter love for them, but, you know, our brains are wired that way to make sure our children survive and thrive and things like that. You know, they interestingly, you know, because it's particularly sort of postnatal depletion and things like that are areas, you know, of very high interest to me. How do our bodies change during pregnancy, postpartum, into motherhood? You know, the pregnancy is 9 months. I think we're often really sort of focused on that, but I've got a real interest in what happens after that, and not just supporting mums in this sort of postpartum period of, you know, 6, 12, 24 months, but even beyond that. And we have neuronal changes that happen in our brains when we're pregnant that make us more hypervigilant, that, you know, are designing us to want to prioritise our children, and a hypervigilance around that. You know, that it's part of what makes us wake up in the night when we hear them cry, or, you know, that we are going to care for them. And so I think that there's very much, you know, a natural genetic component of us that's more prone to prioritising other people in front of ourselves. And then I think there's societal pressures around that as well. And so I feel the mum guilt thing around saying, can I stop and have a massage? Or, you know, that I need to make sure that I'm not just creating a lunch for them. I'm so busy doing that, putting all this nutritional food on a plate, and then I'm so busy that I just end up eating the scraps. Or, you know, this is such a common thing I hear from mums, and I've experienced myself. It's like, oh, let's create this beautiful food, and then I've forgotten to make my own lunch, or I've forgotten to eat, or But we do, it is one of those things that then, in my brain as well, it's like logically, I know that we need to prioritize or bring self-care into the mix here, because otherwise we fall down and then we're not as good at, doing the mother thing. So yes, there's initial guilt often with that, but if we can spin that and go, actually, and this is not about, prioritizing ourselves all the time and forgetting about caring the other people around us. This is trying to get balance in here somewhere. So I think it is hard for a lot of people. But we need to change some of the expectations, and we need to change some of the dialogue. We need to make sure that we are looking after ourselves, not only for our own sake, but I think for everybody's sake as well.
And I love that education component too, of what you were speaking about. It's so important to not just stop caring for mothers in that immediate postpartum phase.
Yes. And this is important for us as individuals, but this is important for us as societies too. I think it's not just mothers who have a pivotal role to play, it's fathers and it's family, and it's, but I think, I think it's important we try and support people. And I think often mums and dads, but often you can get a little bit left by the wayside in terms of trying to sort of hold everything, because we are also quite an individualistic society. So we're often doing it in these sort of small cohorts. We might not have family around us. It's often, you're a mum, you've got your partner, your children's dad, and you're in these small little family units, and you're just trying to do everything without a lot of external help. And even if you do have family locally, once again, societally, my parents still work. It's not like we've got, my parents don't live close enough to have grandparents on hand all the time, and they still work. So, we don't necessarily have that village thing that we may have had in previous times, or that they still have in some other cultures. And it's one of the things that I check in, particularly with mums who are struggling. It's like, how much support do you have around you? Where's your support network? Or, how much sleep are you getting? There's a pattern to those of us who maybe have struggled a little bit more with those whispers becoming shouts at us, telling us that we're struggling.
Yes.
And I think support is an important one. And once again, we can't always change that. But I think that's where we look at what tools can we use. And, often if people are coming to see you or I, Jess, they're looking for support externally, and not just from us. We can't be there all the time. We don't have that sort of level of we've got a relationship with our clients, but, it's part of what we're doing is try and help people, to teach people about some of the tools that they can use so they can feel like they're supporting themselves or self-soothing or... and I think that's where some of these beautiful tools, are almost so magical and have such an important role to play, I think, in, this sort of modern Western societies. It's not a privilege. It's something that's important that we do know how to nurture and support, ourselves.
And there's so much talk about, as you said, self-care being a privilege.
Yes. Yeah, and that mum guilt can play into that too, can't it, if we think about it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've spoken about guilt and time being barriers to implementing self-care. Are there any other major ones that come up for you or your clients regularly in terms of barriers to being consistent?
I think money is always a factor. And so I think, it doesn't have to be time and money. Sometimes people think self-care, maybe I am having to go and pay for a massage where, you know, if you can do it because it's wonderful. But, you know, we don't always have an hour and we don't always have $100 spare. And I think, you know, sort of coming back to herbs, this is where some of the, you know, if we're using things like, you know, herbal teas or, you know, not just herbs, there are a lot of other things, you know, I get people to try and implement things like just breathing deeply throughout your day, or, you know, trying to stop and just have 5 minutes with a cup of tea outside in the sun. You know, where are these sort of quick little things that we can implement? Have a quick bath. You know, things that are quick, you know, easy, enjoyable and free, or, you know, cost little.
Yeah.
I think the other barrier potentially, you know, is it often when you're busy and you're overwhelmed, you know, and I certainly, this is a factor for me a lot of the time, it is about just trying to implement that repetition or that continuity. You know, I don't know about you, Jess, but I will often go, oh, like I need to do something. I'm going to get this new sort of, you know, self-care plan into place, or, you know, this new routine. And then I do it for a week and then I fall off the bandwagon again. And sometimes you can beat yourself up about that. And one of the things I also like to share with my clients is that we've got this sort of thing as well around, you know, routines and having to be perfect all the time and having to get this in place and then beating ourselves up again if we do fall off the bandwagon. And there's that old sort of, you know, it takes 21 days to implement, you know, something on a daily basis to make it a habit. And I remember a long time ago thinking, this doesn't seem to be correct, because I'm sure I've tried to do this and it doesn't work for me. And I did some digging and I did some research, and I found a stack of psychology studies and papers around affecting change, and finding out that actually that was a complete crock. And that it was, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like the majority of people, it was more like 252 days or something for change to occur. And some people might do 21 days, but they were very, very far and few in between. For the majority of normal people, and I talk to people a lot about normal people, and that, you know, you and I are normal people, this is our job, but we experience all of this too, is that, you know, this affecting change, it's like, you know, putting something into place, knowing that as humans, we usually will fall off the bandwagon because life will throw something at us, or we'll get busy, or we'll get overwhelmed again, or whatever it might be, and we fall off the bandwagon. But the quicker you pick yourself up, dust yourself off. I say to people, give yourself a bit of a hug or a pat on the back and say, it's okay. You're doing fine here. Don't beat yourself up. And you jump back on the bandwagon. And then you repeat that. And it's going to happen again. You're going to fall off the bandwagon. But the quicker and the more often you jump back on that, that's when you're going to potentially sort of affect change or put this into place. So not to lose heart, or not to, a lot of us beat ourselves up and go, why can't I do this? I'm hopeless, you know, what's wrong with me? But just keep jumping on that bandwagon. So I think that's important to know that sometimes we can just sort of derail ourselves with our thinking, or putting too much pressure on ourselves.
Yeah, and making people aware of that from the outset, I think, is really empowering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's going to be times when people fall off the bandwagon.
And, you know, we're often asking people to do things, aren't we, Jess? So we're knowing that people are, you know, sort of busy and overwhelmed, and we try to do things sensibly and gently so we're not adding to that overwhelm. But we are still asking people to make changes and do things, and it can be big and it can be confronting, particularly when you're feeling like you're struggling. So I do think that's important to communicate and lighten up, you know, around some of this sort of perfection, or feeling like we have to get it right all the time. And sometimes it's playing with things and going, do you know what? Because that sounds like a really nice self-care thing for me, but that I'm not really feeling that.
Yeah.
You know, for some people, for me, it's a bath, it's a cup of tea, it's a bit of time in nature that floats my boat. For other people, they don't enjoy that at all. That might be going to the gym or, you know, or socializing and so I think it's
Yeah.
important to dip your toe in the water, find out what works for you, change things up potentially if it's not something you find resonates with you and find
Yes.
those things that light you up personally.
And take the pressure off. As you said, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be doing what society tells you is self-care. Whatever feels good for you.
Yes, absolutely. And there was another really nice, you know, these things that stick with you. I can't remember, I'll have to try and find out who it was and let you know. But I remember seeing something beautiful. I think it was by a psychologist on Instagram. And she talked about glimmer moments. And one of the things, and I like this, I like finding tips and tricks for people who are time and energy poor to try and bring in. So then, you know, it's often all of the little things I think that add up into making us, you know, sort of feel healthy and happy. And she talked about glimmer moments as being recognizing those little things that light you up or make you smile. And it can be those funny little things like, I don't know, like recognizing that I've always got a funny one. It's like if I'm outside and I see like a leaf fall down from a tree in front of me or a butterfly go past or something like that. You know, those moments that just kind of light you up and you feel really happy. And it might be, that little glimmer moment, they happen for me outside. So I'm going to try and have my cup of tea outside and be open to, you know, those glimmer moments. Or those glimmer moments might be taking your kids to the beach and seeing them run around, and be silly and feeling that lights you up. So going, well, that's one of those self-care things that I'm going to bring in more often. It's just taking my kids to the beach. Or it might be a quiet, can you slip off and have a swim on your own, in your own moment, have that own moment of quiet if you've got the luxury to do that. And go, well, that's that thing that lights me up and makes me feel amazing. So I'm going to do more of that as my self-care thing. And I like that idea of glimmer moments and listening to yourself about those things that really light you up, because then I think it feels less like a chore too. If you're like, oh, well, I have to make this herbal tea because my herbalist told me to, or I have to go and do this exercise because, you know, and yes, I think we've all got to do a bit of movement, but, you know, rather than trying to force yourself to do something that just you're not enjoying, try and find your glimmer moments.
I'm often encouraging clients to recall those glimmer moments, so whether that's in a journal or mentally at the end of the day, and I find that can really help to change mindset too.
That's a fabulous tip. I like that. I know, you know, we've kind of edged into somehow talking about mothers a lot, and this is not, I think all of these things can be applicable for anybody who, you know, particularly, I think we talked about busyness a lot. But I think that what you've said about that sort of journaling and things like that, I think sometimes, you know, if we are talking about mothers, there's a little bit of that importance in trying to kind of reconnect with ourselves and find out who we are on the other side, you know, of becoming mums, isn't there? Where I think that would be, your tips would be really effective there, Jess.
Yeah, it's important time. You mentioned having a bath and having a cup of tea and spending some time in your garden as a way of introducing self-care into your days. I was wondering if you'd mind sharing what rituals and other routines you tend to weave into your days in terms of self-care.
I think sometimes I'm not good at this at all. I think I've gotten better at it. Probably the older my children have gotten. They're 11 and 8 now, so it's very different to, you know, those of your listeners who've got, you know, children who are toddlers or babies, and, you know, finding that time is a lot harder then. You know, do have more spaces now where I can find some of that time, but, you know, it's work and a lot of the other things take up a lot of space. So it is important. I think I do try and do a lot of little things. I do try and have, you know, a little space, a half an hour after dropping my kids off at school, in starting my day where I can have a cup of tea, and I do like to sit outside for that because it calms my nervous system down, and just slow down after the mad school rush and the lunch boxes and the fighting over, where are your socks, and it's a bit of madness in our house in the mornings. I think for a lot of people, I really like utilizing sensory tools, and I think for a lot of people this is really grounding, but it's things like scent and music. I've often got music on. Even if I'm doing my consults, I'll often have music on quietly in the background, and that's something personally that helps me a lot to sort of be grounded or calm. I'll often have, my oil, essential oils on the diffuser, or some incense or something, because I think that scent is a really nice thing as well. It's very calming. One of the little rituals I do like to do, and I do share with some of my clients, and once again, this is about sort of time effectiveness, but is doing a little sort of shower ritual. And that might be, I like to kind of close, I'm sure it's not very good for mold and things like that, but I like to close my bathroom up, put the hot on, make it a bit steamy, put some really beautiful essential oils on the tiles, not enough for it to be slippery, but just on, so that water hits it and it all comes up in the steam. And I bring my phone and put my Spotify on some nice, and make it a bit like a nice little spa ritual in the morning. And, it's not any extra time really. I'm having my shower anyway, but it's like this little moment where I can just shut the door, and it's a little moment for me. And, it's one of those things, I think a lot of us like to feel a little bit pampered and don't necessarily always get the opportunity to do that, but it's almost like a little, whether it's a 5-minute, 10-minute sort of self-pampering session for yourself. So I do think, it's a lot of these little things are just things where I have to find these little windows of time, but it's almost like injecting a little bit of beauty into your life as well. And I think the other big one that I sort of only started implementing a few years ago, but I think was a complete game changer, was being very conscious of how I breathe. Because I think a lot of us, when we're stressed or busy, we breathe very shallowly, and that shallow breathing just kind of sends a signal straight back to our brain that we're kind of always in this fight or flight pattern. It's a bit chicken or egg with that one. But if you can take your breath back just into your tummy, and I often say to people, like, once again, this is not having to go and sit down for an hour and meditate, or this is a foray into that sort of mindfulness side of things. But if you can just do 3 deep breaths 3 times a day, and that might be when you flip the kettle on, or you drive the car, or you've got if you've got small kids, if you can get to the loo on your own and not be interrupted, like, just be conscious of where your breath is. Try and do 3 deep breaths, and you feel an instant calm, because you are sending messages straight back up to your brain that you're in a state of calm. We do need that oxygen around our body. Sometimes this is just coming back to basics, isn't it, Jess? Like, we need oxygen. We need to be breathing properly. We need to drink enough water and stay hydrated. Sometimes it's very simple things. But it's another one that I found was a game changer for my nervous system, just to make sure that I'm a bit conscious of when I'm breathing shallowly and bringing it back. And it's something it's free, it's easy, it costs you very, very little time, but you can just do that at certain points during the day just to keep kind of bringing you back to that baseline. And so I think there's some of the things that I've found, have personally been effective, and have been effective for a lot of people I speak to who might not have a lot of time.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful, Em. And you spoke about initially that connection with being outside and being in the garden, and I know that you've always had plants growing wherever you are, and I know that connection's still really strong too.
Yes. Sorry, Jess, it just cut out at the end there.
That's okay. I was just talking about how much you have always had a really lovely connection with your garden, and I've always had plants wherever you are.
Yes, I do. I do find that that's one of my happy places is being outside, being in the garden and growing things. Where I'm living currently, we are renting here, and I don't have the luxury of being able to actually put things into the ground. But I do have things growing in pots, and so I do have, at the moment I've got some mugwort, and I've got some tulsi growing, and I've got some yarrow growing. I've got a lot of sort of culinary herbs. I've got a beautiful wood beatony plant, which is quite an old-fashioned sort of English herb. We go through trends, I think, with herbs in terms of what's popular, and we don't necessarily hear a lot about wood beatony, and I like some of these sort of old-fashioned herbs that don't necessarily get the spotlight, but are wonderful and shouldn't be forgotten. So I would love one day to have my own garden and really have a lot of medicinals in there and things that are pretty. But I may do with pots for now, and it's definitely, I do like caring for them. It's something else that I find very relaxing.
Tell us a little bit about wood Bethany.
She's I can't even remember where I got her. But she's a lovely herb, and she's one of these ones that she is good for your nervous system. She's great for that feeling like you're overwhelmed and that you're in your head a lot, and particularly for people who get headaches. And she is a herb for sort of bringing you back into your body when you've got too much of this almost sort of cerebral nervous system stuff. I always think of like all this blood pumping to your head. She, in terms of growing her, I think she's very much a plant that would like to be in England, because she looks awful at the moment. As soon as it's summer, she looks awful, and she thrives as soon as it gets cooler again. I almost feel a little bit cruel keeping her. And I've played around with other plants that I haven't had success with in Australia, like that. I never can keep lady's mantle happy. I think we had a chat about keeping chamomile happy. So it seems to be a real struggle.
Yes.
And I think my roots are very English Irish. So I often wonder, sometimes if we have a bit of a connection to some plants that goes a bit. I like to think it goes a bit deeper than just this generation. That maybe there's something sort of back in our roots that has made us familiar with some of these plants, and it's one of the reasons I really love English herbalism. I think we're a bit cheeky. I love the fact that we've stolen a lot of Indian, Ayurvedic plants, and we get to steal a lot of Chinese plants, and we get to use a lot of these sort of other herbs in our dispensaries. I think it's wonderful that we've got such choice. And I'm certainly not sort of a Puritan when it comes to sticking with a certain arm of herbalism, but I do really love, some of these sort of English herbs, and would love to be able to grow more of them. But I live in subtropical northern New South Wales, and I have to have to see what will cope with it, or where I can find a little part of the garden that's a bit cooler or shadier to try and sort of keep some of these things alive.
It's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we've spoke about some of the beautiful ways that are cost effective, don't take a lot of time, but are really profound in the effects that they have on the body and the mind, in ways that you not only implement self-care yourself, but also tips that you share with your clients. And I was wondering, during times when you are able to be consistent with those things we spoke about, what sorts of shifts do you start to see in your body and your mind and your spirit when those things are at the forefront?
I think that's a really nice question. I think certainly that feeling of just being more balanced. I think it's one of those things, isn't it? It's hard to explain what that feels like, but I think what we're trying to do a lot of the time is just find that balance. And so I think often that's feeling calm, but with enough energy. Often, not having that sort of like up and down of energy where you're up and then you drop, but that sort of like beautiful, stable energy that's not too much, not too little, and that feeling of calm around it, which I think can, now I'm reflecting on it, can be quite hard to sort of get to that place or to keep it into that place. But I think often that's what I'm looking to achieve in my own self-care. It's very, that idea of balance is very, what's the word for it, Jess? It never really stays there for long, isn't it? I think you're often kind of going, okay, what's out of balance here? How do I bring this back in? It's very fluid. But yeah, I think that often and just feeling like I've kind of got that hold on life, that it's not too overwhelming, that I'm able to sort of be happy and take it all in my stride and see things clearly. And I think that's one of the nice things, that if you have those things lined up, or you know what you're trying to work toward there, and got that feeling is, then knowing your tools. I think is the other step there, to understand how to get you there, which is what I think we're often trying to do as herbalists, is listening to what part of our body is telling us that it's not happy or it's a bit out of balance, and then using the appropriate tools to try and sort of nudge it back into some sort of center, so that your body, which is very clever, can then sort of pick the rest up and take it on board and go, yeah, okay, if my nervous system's out of whack and you're helping me to settle my nervous system, well, then my sleep comes back into place, and then I naturally have more energy, and then I think more clearly. Sometimes it's just kind of trying to figure out where to nudge it, isn't it, that we're trying to sort of get to, so that other things fall in around that.
And I think that's such a lovely gift that we can give not only ourselves but also our clients. If you're feeling in balance and that sense of overwhelm has settled, then everything else becomes clearer and it becomes more doable, and you don't feel like you have to think about self-care as much. It starts to become a little bit more spontaneous because it feels good, and you've reached that place of habit where it is instilled, and as you said, you will fall off, but you're getting back on more quickly.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it is, I guess it is that's why it feels so much harder, doesn't it, sometimes, to do the self-care when you're in that place of, feeling tired or feeling overwhelmed, but that's when it's most needed. It comes more easily when you're not in that place, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's important that not only ourselves experience the positive side of what we've spoken about, the shifts that you experience when you are prioritising self-care, or our clients are prioritising self-care. When we feel those shifts deep in ourselves, it's so much easier to get back on the bandwagon when we fall off, because we can remember how we felt when we were in that place where we were able to be consistent.
Absolutely. And I think this is where, I'm sure you're the same. I think a lot of us, we're not just trying to fix people. We're trying to show people and teach people the tools that they can use so that they can support themselves. And I think a lot of us feel this. I remember when we, very early on in our degree, Jess, we're doing that sort of, naturopathic foundations, and what is it called? The Hippocratic Oath and all of those items that they've got in the Hippocratic Oath. And there was, doctor as teacher. it was always one of those that really sort of
Yeah.
stood out to me, that I knew from very early on this was what I wanted to do. I wanted to learn this so that I could share it with other people, because once again, I think going back to this knowledge, particularly around herbal medicine and around food, and you know, I put food and nutrition into the same category because this is all medicine that we're getting from plants, isn't it? And it was like we had this knowledge, I feel, in previous times that got lost for a long time. And it was, you would go to herbalists, or I assume that people pass this down. Your mum knew to give you chamomile tea. I remember reading my kids, the Peter Rabbit books, and in the Peter Rabbit books they talk about Peter's mum after a day when he's been out and been really naughty. He comes home and she makes him a chamomile tea, obviously to calm naughty Peter Rabbit down. And so I find it really interesting. Have you read those? Do you remember coming across those and being like, oh wow, she's got these little
Yes,
references to herbal
I do.
medicine? I think I was more excited than the kids about it. Um, and but I think we used to have this knowledge that we used to pass down, but it feels like a lot of it got lost, and it's such important, beautiful knowledge that we can use at home. You know, we don't have to be going and getting prescriptions for this stuff. If we understand how we can use chamomile tea at home to help not only bring our nervous systems down, but that it's safe and gentle enough to help with our children if they're upset or if they're not sleeping very well. And I often talk to my clients about, you know, this, I want to share this with you, I want to try this with you. If it's something that works for you, let's add this to your toolkit and let me explain ways that you can use this, or you can source this, or because we're trying to get you back to balance, and you're going to feel good then. But often I say to people, this is not about, we're not curing anyone of anything. And the balance is likely, you know, if you turn around again and in 6 months you've got a huge stressor and everything just falls, you know, off the bandwagon again, you need to, you know, if you've got tools to be able to get yourself back on, and you will get yourself back on more quickly if you've used these tools before and you've gotten yourself back on track. You know, the quicker you jump in, the quicker you'll sort of get things back to balance. But I think it's really important that we bring some of this knowledge back, and we take some of the fear potentially out of it, while also being careful, you know, that people are aware that there are things where you can go overboard with some of these things, and they're not always completely safe. But you know, that we can use some of these things, particularly like herbs and food, you know, and breathing and things like that in our own homes, and we can teach them to our children. And I think it'd be really beautiful if we got to a place where this sort of self-care knowledge just became something that we were all more educated in, and we were able to pass down from generation to generation again.
It's almost like helping people to remember, you know, this is cell memory.
Yes.
We've had this knowledge, and we're the conduit. You know, we're helping people to remember and empowering them so that, as you said, you know, they won't always be well. There's going to be things that tip them over, but if they feel confident that they have those tools, then that's such a great place to be.
Yeah, and it is self-empowering. I think you mentioned, you know, that term earlier too, but I think that is something that's self-empowering. If we feel like we can, you know, we've got some of these tools, we can take some of these things in our own hands. And I think it's been I think we have to go through these changes in, you know, what's happened with medicine. And, you know, we very much now, a lot of us are, you know, my mum's a nurse. She's a nurse practitioner, come from sort of medical background, but a very different medical background. But I'm very big on, you know, not being seen as an alternative medicine practitioner, but a complementary one. And, you know, I think it's important that we had advances in science and medicine and things so that, you know, if my child breaks their leg tomorrow, I take them straight to emergency. I'm not, you know, putting, you know, comfrey and, you know, things on and crossing my fingers and hope for the best. I'm taking that we've all got our roles, But, particularly I think when it comes to, I think a lot of the work we do and where we're so well positioned, particularly, this is why I do women's health. And I look after mums, but I also help people with fertility, and I help people with PCOS and endo and hormonal conditions, because I think that we are better placed with some of our tools to help people with hormonal conditions, and to help people with sleep, and to help people with stress and energy a lot of the time, if it's not tied into another sort of medical issue that needs to be addressed differently. We've got more tools at our fingertips here. My clients are so surprised that if they show to me with PCOS, and particularly if they're trying to have a baby, and usually with PCOS the recommendations are, well, look, the only tool we've really got is that maybe you go on the pill, which is not going to solve the issues around PCOS, and certainly is not going to be any help to you if you're looking to fall pregnant. Yet people are absolutely stunned when licorice and peony reduce testosterone so quickly and so wonderfully in the majority of situations, and that if blood sugar balance is a part of this, that knowing how to eat properly, or including cinnamon, or gymnema, or things like that, that in a few months you're managing this. And people are, why isn't this spoken about? Why isn't this given to you as an option? And I think it's crazy that this still is not recognised at being effective, because it is so effective. And that's the reason why I really like to work in women's health, because I feel that the tools that we have with herbal medicine and, some of our sort of nutritional, vitamins and things like that we know work therapeutically, are so effective in these situations that there are not necessarily those tools in that sort of, mainstream medical model that work there. So I think it's just about going, look, different situations, different tools, but we have ones that just work incredibly without a lot of side effect profile.
Yeah. Yes, and as you said, that knowledge should be available to everybody. This is knowledge that our foremothers and fathers had.
Yes. And that we do have more science behind now too, which I know you and I have had conversations about, because we're both science lovers and we're both very logically brained, but we are also very, I think, sort of intuitive, empathic. I think that a lot of this comes in how we sort of use herbal medicine and support people emotionally as well. But we have more science now that explains how and why herbs work. So we do have information and backing behind it, that this is not just woo-woo. These things have strong constituents that have effects in our body, and this is how they work, and we know the right things that, we used to know the right things that work for the right situations because people just used to observe it. But now we've got extra lengths of proving how these things work and understanding the right things to use, and that's evidence-based herbal medicine. And, it's exciting. But it would be nice, I think these things are going to come more to the forefront, and they already are. There's a lot of interest from particularly a lot of women in going, how do I, the other models aren't really working for me. I want to explore this. This feels good to me. This feels good to my body. I'm not putting a Band-Aid on here. And so I think it will be nice to watch, because I do think that this is going to become more prominent, our understanding of all of this. So it's very humbling and exciting to be a part of that, in terms of, doing something that you love, understanding it, helping people, but trying to be a part of, I guess affecting that change in healthcare so that more people know about the options.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you one last question, and this is, I know, a really tricky one for herbalists. It's like asking you to choose your favourite child. But I was wondering if you could share with me
I know what you're going to ask me.
which which plant do you have the deepest connection with, and
Oh,
why is that?
Jess. Oh. So you need to put an extra hour onto these things and ask all the herbalists for your top 10, I think.
Yes.
Oh, my favourite, I think, very much changes. Uh,
Yeah.
Changes a lot, depending, from time to time, and as I discover more herbs, and play around on a different level, I think, with more herbs. Do you know what? I think initially there were lots that kind of flew through my head then. I've got a real affinity with valerian, actually. Yeah, stinky rotten feet herb is. I know it's very polarizing, isn't it, valerian? Because it's such a. I know a lot of the
Yes.
herbalists will laugh, and for those who don't know, it'd be very interesting if you ever got an opportunity to get some dried herb or some tincture and smell valerian. I think even if it's in a capsule, you get a good whiff of it. I love the smell of it, but it's very potent.
Yes.
I think it's very much almost like that sort of blue cheese or parmesan-y sort of thing. Some people are like, oh, it smells a bit like rotting feet. Not that valerian smells exactly like that, but as soon as anyone opens, I remember when I was working in a clinic where we had a big dispensary, as soon as anybody opened that bottle of valerian, my senses were onto it straight away, and it was just like, when you smell jasmine or something in the garden that picks you up, I was just like, oh yes,
Yes.
pour me a bit of that. And it's funny, I don't know, I remember reading, I think it was Culpeper, and that I'm a Virgo, and that there's, it's a very Virgoan herb. And I think it's one of those that is certainly, when I get stressed or when things, my sleep tends to go out. So I love it for sleep. It makes me sleep like a baby. And I also use it if I tend to because my thing is very much heading into that sort of overthinking and being too much in my head when I'm out of balance. And I find that I even like having some of it during the day because it brings me down, gets me back in my body, and I think it's a GABA. It helps with GABA production, so I can certainly see that sort of, those anxiolytic effects. But I think a lot of people think of it as a sleep herb, not necessarily something to use during the day. And certainly, I think if you're of a slower, disposition, I wouldn't be using it. But for those of us that tend to, when we get stressed, get a bit racy or a bit anxious. It can be very nice, and I like it as a tea. The other one that I know I'm not meant to do too, but that just made me think of that too is Damiana. That bringing you into your body. It's the other one that I find is really, to get you out of your head and relax and just switch that monkey mind off. And I do. I very much know I've got a real affinity with valerian.
So do you like to enjoy valerian in a tea on her own with that lovely taste, or do you put some other ones in there?
Do you know, I would enjoy it on its own, Jess. But I've got a tea blend. I've got several canisters in the kitchen that have different blends, and I change them up quite often, but I've pretty much always had one of them full with some valerian, some passion flower, and some oat straw.
Valerian.
And I really like that for in the evenings. And I can have a cup of tea of that, if I know that I'm starting the day off a bit racy, or it's very busy. And so I would usually have it in a blend. I mean, those things don't taste. They're not going to really sort of alter the taste profile on that too much.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure having you, Em. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Oh, thanks, Jess. So have I. It's always really lovely to chat to you, and I think what you're doing with this podcast is just wonderful. So thank you so much. I feel really honoured to be sharing a little bit, and it's just been nice having a chat about herbal medicine. So you can't wait to sort of listen to all of your other episodes and see who you've got on next.
Thanks, Em. I'm so glad you tuned into this episode of Self-Care with Herbs, a segment of the Elder Tree podcast. The Elder Tree is a non-profit dedicated to empowering people through grassroots herbal education and earth skills, weaving a strong community of herbalists, healers and plant folk in Australia. The Elder Tree is in the beginning stages of creating a grassroots herbal education centre and healing sanctuary on the Atherton Tablelands, far north Queensland. You can head over to theeldertree.org to find out more and follow the journey on Instagram and Facebook. You can also donate to the Elder Tree via our podcast channel on Anchor or via the website. If you liked the episode, we'd love you to subscribe, and if you know who we should interview next, drop us a line. I hope you found something in this episode that has inspired you to begin to lean into those plant allies and to experience your practice of self-care blossoming and blooming. I look forward to sharing more ways you can weave plant medicine into your days next month.